Shalom, giving honor and praise to the Creator and the Maker of heaven and earth. This is Yeshaya Yisrael. Going to do a presentation concerning the Sabbath. We're going to go to the book of Genesis, chapter 2, verse 1. And it says, "And the heaven and the earth were finished, and all the hosts of them. And on the seventh day, God finished his work which he had made. And he rested on the seventh day from all his work which he had made. And God blessed the seventh day and hallowed it, because that in it he rested from all his work which God in creating had made." Now, this right here lets us know, brothers and sisters, that the seventh day was the last day of the week, and thus also in the Hebrew culture will be the last day of the week itself on the Hebrew calendar. Okay, now I want to sit there and go over a particular subject, if we will. We can go to the book of Genesis, chapter 2, verse 1 once again, but we're going to go from the Hebrew and see what it says so we can gain some understanding. And it says, "Why hashamayim wa haaretz wa kal zaba'am wa kal Elohim b'yom hashbi'i melakto asher asa wa yishbot b'yom hashbi'i mekol malakto asher asa wa barek Elohim et yom hashbi'i wa kwadesh oto Kibo Shabbat Mikol Malakto Asher Bara Elohim La Asot." What that right there is saying, and the point I wanted to point out, is the Hebrew word Shabbat. The Hebrew word Shabbat is a verb. It means to discontinue. It means to cease. It means to stop. Now, unfortunately, you have a lot of translations that have the word Shabbat meaning to rest, which, yes, it is a rest day, but it's not rest as if you're tired. That kind of thing. It's not rest as if you're in a situation in which you can't do absolutely, positively nothing else whatsoever. That's not what that means. What Shabbat is a discontinuation from the regular days of the week. That's what Shabbat is, okay? Now, let's go and confirm that. Let's go to the book of Exodus, chapter 20, verse 8. "Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days shalt thou labor and do all thy work. But the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord thy God. In it thou shalt not do any manner of work, thou, nor thy son, nor thy daughter, nor thy manservant, nor thy maidservant, nor thy cattle, nor thy stranger that is within thy gates. For in 6 days the Most High made the heaven and the earth, the sea and all that in them is, and rested on the seventh day. Wherefore the Most High blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it." So now, one of the things to let it be noted and understood is that the Shabbat on the Hebrew calendar is the only day of the week that actually has a full name to itself. Other days of the week are counted by the first day, second day, third day, fourth day, so forth and so on. Now, wanting to sit there and get into what might seem to be controversial to some, and that is the fact that you have Israelites, unfortunately, some who sit there and teach that the Sabbath is determined by the moon. And let's see how accurate that is by going into the scriptures itself. All right? Let's go to Genesis chapter 1:14. "And God said, Let there be lights in the firmament of the heaven, to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and years. And let them be for lights in the firmament of the heaven, to give light upon the earth. And it was so. And God made the two great lights, the greater light to rule the day, and the lesser light to rule the night and the stars. And God set them in the firmament of the heaven, to give light upon the earth, and to rule over the day and over the night, and to divide the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. And it was evening, and it was morning, a fourth day." So one of the things to let it be known and understood is that the sun, the moon, and the stars were created on what we call the fourth day of creation. Now, 3 days after that was when the first Sabbath came. So to the brothers and sisters who are teaching that you know when the Sabbath is of the week concerning the moon cycle, one has to ask, how then does that moon look? Because the new moon determines what month it is. However, the time of the Sabbath is a weekly thing. The moon, which in Hebrew is said as the word Kodesh. Now, the word Kodesh also means month. You understand? This is why now when you go to the book of Numbers chapter 10 verse 10, it says like in the beginning of your months, Rad She Kad Shekem. Kad Shekem means your months from the Hebrew word Kodesh, which means month. So let that be noted and understood. So getting back now into the book of Genesis, knowing that the moon, we all agree, determines what month it is by what they refer to in science and today as the waxing and the waning. Some go by what you call the dark disk as the new moon. Some go by the first crescent. This particular teaching is not going to be focused on that. We're going to stay in line and reference when the Sabbath is. And that is the fact that it cannot, brothers and sisters, be determined by the month or by the moon. And here's the reason why. Days make weeks. Weeks make months. Months make years. Since we already know that the Sabbath is the seventh day of the week, how then are we to determine that by looking at the moon? Because when you're dealing with something that is dealing with the monthly count, such as, for instance, Passover comes in the month of Abib, even though it's a yearly event, right? Now, every 14th day of the month of Abib, the moon is full. When you're dealing in Leviticus chapter 23 and you talk about the Feast of Booths, which is the 14th into the 15th day of the 7th month of Etanim. That shows you right there, brothers and sisters, that the moon is always full then. So we have to sit back and taking that into consideration. Whenever Pesach or Passover and the Feast of Booths is, there's always going to be a full moon. Every time there's Yom Kippur, when the 10th day of the 7th month, you're going to see that moon looking the same way. So with that in mind, would it not also be then, if the moon determined when the Sabbath is, that the moon should look the same each and every single Sabbath? But it doesn't look the same each and every single Sabbath. Why? Because the moon, which is used to determine the months, cannot be the same article that's used to determine what to do for a weekly event. That's why. Let's take it to another case. A woman has what? A monthly. Now, when a woman has her monthly, that's something that's done a particular day of the month, be it usually some cases the 15th or the 16th of the month, regardless of whatever day of the week it is. So that right there has to be known and understood and so forth. Let's go to Isaiah 66, verse 23, because there are some brothers and sisters who go there in reference concerning this type of matter. We are in Yeshaya or Isaiah 66, 23, and it says, "And it shall come to pass that from one new moon to another, and from one Sabbath to another, shall all flesh come to worship before me, saith the Most High." Now, some brothers and sisters go here and say, see, it says the new moon, which is of the months, and then it says the Sabbath. All that's being stated is that when these times come, the Most High is going to be worshipped by all flesh. That's what it's talking about. It says the same thing in the book of Zechariah about the Feast of Tabernacles or the Feast of Weeks. It also speaks about all nations coming to serve the Most High. So it's not a calendar issue that we have to sit there and focus on looking at Isaiah chapter 66. So that's why in all thy getting, get understanding. You understand? Brothers and sisters, the new moon does not determine, brothers and sisters, when the Sabbath is. So that way we can gain an understanding concerning that. Let's go, brothers and sisters, to Leviticus chapter 23. We're going to go to Leviticus chapter 23 and let the book speak for itself. Verse 9, if we will. And it says the following. Leviticus 23, starting in verse 9. "And the Most High spoke unto Moses, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel, and say unto them, When you are come into the land which I give unto you, you shall reap the harvest thereof. Then you shall bring the sheaf of the first fruits of your harvest unto the priest. And he shall wave the sheaf before the Most High, to be accepted for you. On the morrow, after the Sabbath, the priest shall wave it. And on the day when you wave the sheaf, you shall offer a he lamb without blemish of the first year, for a burnt offering unto the Most High. And a meal offering thereof shall be 2/10 of an ephah of fine flour mingled with oil, an offering made by fire unto the Most High, for a sweet savor. And a drink offering thereof shall be of wine, and the fourth part of a hin. And ye shall eat neither bread, nor parched corn, nor fresh ears, until the selfsame day, until you have brought the offering of your God. It is a statute forever throughout your generations and all your dwellings. And ye shall count unto," verse 15, "and ye shall count unto you from the morrow after the day of rest, which is to say the Sabbath, and you shall count unto you from the morrow after the Shabbat, from the day you brought the sheaf of the waving, 7 weeks there shall be complete. Even unto the morrow after the 7th week, ye shall number 50 days, and ye shall present a new meal offering unto the Most High. You shall bring out of your dwellings 2 wave loaves of 2/10 of an ephah. They shall be of fine flour. They shall be baked with leaven for first fruits unto the Most High. Now, one of the things I wanted to sit there and point it out concerning this type of matter right here is in verse 15 and 16 of here. And it says, and ye shall count unto you from the morrow after the Shabbat. Now, in Leviticus chapter 23, verse 15, when it says the day of rest or the Sabbath or Shabbat, it is specifically talking about that weekly Shabbat. What's going on is this, if you take it from verse 9. When they get into the land, because the Feast of Weeks, which is called Pentecost in the New Testament, which is called Chag Shabuot in the Old Testament, okay? Because Shabuot is the plural of the word Shabu'ah. Shabu'ah means week, W-E-E-K. Okay, now let it be noted and understood. When it says in verse 15 and 16, you shall count unto you from the morrow after the Shabbat, from the day you brought the sheaf of the waving. So let's say, for instance, that in today's calendar, you have it on the 5th day, quote unquote Thursday, right? You have that sheaf, that first sheaf that came up, you bring that up to the priest, right? And it says that the priest is to wave that. Now, once he waves that on that time, right? You shall count unto you from the morrow after the day of rest, from the day that you brought the sheaf of the waving. 7 weeks shall be complete. Even unto the morrow after the 7th week, you shall count 50 days, and you shall present a new meal offering unto the Most High. Now, when you go in verse 16, and it says, until that 50th day, that 50th day is called in the New Testament Pentecost, and in the Old Testament it is referred to as the Feast of Weeks, or some call it the Feast of the Ingathering. So what's going on is this is the only day in the Hebrew calendar that doesn't have a date on the calendar. Not like the month of Abib or the month of Bul or the month of Etanim or the month of Kislev, so forth and so on. It does not have an actual date to it. Like Passover is the 14th day of the first month. Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, is the 10th day of the 7th month. When you're dealing with the Feast of Weeks, it does not have a particular date on the Hebrew calendar, because the sheaf that is to be waved could come up at any given time. It could come up 2 weeks before Passover. It could come up 2 weeks after Passover. So what's being stated is that since that doesn't have a specific date upon it, and knowing when you study about agriculture, the barley and the wheat harvest that could come up at any given time of, generally speaking, the month of Abib. Abib now in today's calendar comes in late March and April, which Abib means spring. Now, when you go in the Bible, in the book of Exodus, chapter 9, it speaks about the sprouting forth, because the Hebrew word Abib comes from the root Hebrew word Ebab, which means sprouting forth or greenery. Because that's how Deuteronomy 16, when it says, observe the month of Abib, observe from the Hebrew word shamar, which means to observe or to see or to watch, because you have to know agriculture to know and understand when the Feast of Tabernacles is going to sit there and be coming in. Now, let's go to Deuteronomy 16, verse 9, so we can gain an understanding of what's being said. All right. Deuteronomy 16, verse 9. 7 weeks you shall number unto you, from the time that the sickle is first put to the standing corn. Thou shalt begin to number 7 weeks. And thou shalt keep the feast of weeks unto the Most High, after the measure of the freewill offering of thy hand, which thou shalt give, according as the Most High thy King blesseth thee. So what's going on in Deuteronomy 16, verse 9 and 10 is the same law that is being spoken about in Leviticus 23, verses 9 to verse 21. So that way we can gain an understanding concerning that. That is called the Feast of Weeks. Now, how does that tie into this conversation about the Shabbat? Because it says you shall count 7 weeks. So within that 7 weeks, you're going to have 7 Sabbaths. So you understand? That's going to include 7 Sabbaths, because the Sabbath is a weekly event. So if you're saying that the new moon determines when the Sabbath is, that will mess up the count for when you have in the Feast of Weeks. If you understand what's being stated. It says count 50 days, knowing that new moon comes in every 28 to 30 days. Within that count, from the time that you brought that sheaf up to the priest for the waving, from that beginning until the time that that priest waves it, Until the timing of that 50th day, there's going to be a new moon. So you can't tell when the Sabbath is by the new moon, because then that will mean that the timing of the Feast of Weeks will be thrown off, because there will have to be a new moon coming in. Shalom on part one.